All right. If you can see us and hear us now, we're just going to wait. We've got LinkedIn and YouTube not started yet, so we're waiting for that to happen now. So YouTube's always first,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
LinkedIn follows. And so we'll try not to stuff up the intro this week. All right.
Yeah.
We will do our best, but there are no promises, right?
We were just discussing about the stress before the actual show, and I think Richard, you had some real stress just before, right?
I did indeed. We couldn't find the passport. My daughter, who's flying out later today, and for once she's not going with the train. But it's no difference really. You still need a passport to return to continental Europe. So yeah.
Yeah.
But,
good fun.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brexit.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
exactly.
You guys make things so much easier, At least, when we were in France last week, landing in Nantes, there are
All
two
right.
lines.
We're ready.
One for Europeans and one for UK and the others. It's like.
All right. You guys ready?
Never,
All right,
but let's go ahead. Yeah.
All right. Welcome to the Shit Show. My name's Andrea Edwards.
My name's David Coe. Welcome.
Bottom left, you have me, Richard Basalato.
And my name is Joe Augustin, and welcome to the show that we named to kind of reflect the situation in the world right now. We're trying to untangle the poly crisis, or meta crisis, as it's sometimes known, a simultaneous occurrence of several catastrophic events all happening at the same time. Maybe it includes a lost passport. What we try to do here on the show is also to have a diverse point of view. So what we try to do is bring on guests that help us in that. So today's guest is an international keynote speaker, innovation strategist, award-winning author, and inventor of the 6 Eyes of Innovation. It's a framework used around the world to help people and organizations put purpose at the heart of creativity and change. She's the author of Yes, You Can Innovate, and the forthcoming novel, The Red Silk Dress, a story of longing, courage, and transformation set across Cambodia, Malaysia, and Paris. Through her work from corporate advisory and women's leadership to fiction, and her recent TEDx talk for Mavila on purpose-centered innovation, her mission is to awaken human creativity and lead change that truly matters. Natalie Turner, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, everyone. It's wonderful to be here today.
Yeah, no, thank you. And it's the first time Natalie's going to be talking about her book, The Red Silk Dress. And I thought, just to set the stage a little bit, I was invited to write a review for the book in the build up to launch, which I always feel very honored. And I thought I'd just give you guys a sense of what I thought about it. So I'm not a big fiction kind of girl. I don't spend a lot of time on those sort of books. I've got, I'll be reading about coal or the fossil fuel industry. That's the sort of stuff I read. So, but here's my review: sensual, visual, and visceral, but above all, empowering. The Red Silk Dress is a story of courage and the heart-wrenching struggle to live on your own terms. For readers seeking a nudge or even a push to be braver, this novel delivers a powerful message. Now is not the time to play small. And really, I honestly can't wait to see it on the big screen. I think it's got the equivalence of Eat, Pray, Love. So, Natalie, who's your leading female character? Who would you choose?
Wow. Oh, what in terms of on being on screen? Oh my goodness! Yeah. Wow. I don't know. Maybe Kate Blanchett. I think she would be good.
Yeah, she'd definitely be good. But I think of somebody a bit younger. But anyway, yeah, it's an amazing book. So I thought, rather than just tell your story, which we'd love you to do, also maybe talk about moving into fiction, because it's quite different to what you did with Yes, You Can Innovate. But specifically with the Red Silk Dress, really, let's get to the heart of the book. So we'll hand it over to you.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, yes, as Joe said, my background is in innovation and leadership, and that's still a very central part of my work. And I've spent many years helping organizations to navigate change, transformation, bring sort of how to bring stronger cultures of innovation into how they work and how they stimulate and motivate environments for people to bring ideas into the world. But Going back a number of years now, it was actually 2015. I went on a writer's retreat in Angkor Wat in Cambodia, and that really began the beginning of the book. So it's 10 years in the making, but really I would say 5 years ago, 2020, when I moved from Johor Bahru in southern Malaysia to Penang, I put a stake in the ground. I thought now is the time to really get writing. So it's taken me about 5 years now to write the book, and I was really interested in exploring transformation through a more human, intimate lens. And at the time, I think I was on my own journey of change, and I felt that there was something missing in my life. I'd always wanted to be a fiction writer since I was a little girl, and it was really a buried dream. And it was in that retreat that Claudette, who's the main character of my story, she appeared in my imagination. And we went on an adventure together, you know, her through her whole life and reinvention of me and my fulfillment in becoming a novelist.
Nice. But you've got to tell everyone the story about your childhood with your interesting parents, because I think that's also another aspect of you that most people don't know about.
Yeah, well, I had a bit of a crazy upbringing, a wonderful upbringing. My parents were international speakers and teachers in more in the spiritual domain of life, and so I grew up in different places with them, and had I mean one day I will write or fictionalize my childhood, because I think that will be quite an adventure. I don't think I could ever write memoir. It would be a bit too close to the core, but yes, maybe I'll fictionalize it at some point.
Oh yeah, maybe, yeah. It's not a nice thing to say, but later, you know, when you can, because I mean, you grow up in slums around the world, you know, with your parents' ministry, right? So it's super interesting. Yeah, watch Natalie's TED Talk. I'll try and put it in the chat. All right, so let's using your book as inspiration. Let's get stuck into the heart of it, because I know you've only got an hour with us. But we are in a world in crisis. Everything is unstable. Everyone's uncertain. Coming back to Singapore, I really see it, Natalie. There's an energy here that is different to the energy that I first experienced, you know, years ago. And it's a fear. It's a fear of AI. It's a fear of climate change. It's a fear of geopolitics. So when we're in such an unstable time, which isn't going to get any better, how do we reinvent ourselves when the world seems to be falling apart around us?
Wow. Yeah. Well, I think, reinvention for me isn't about becoming something new. I think it is, in a way, about remembering who we were before we even started performing. And while I've spent many years helping organizations to innovate, I think the transfer innovation, if you like, the personal side of innovation and transformation, it can be so much harder, because it demands an honesty, facing the gap between who we have become and who we are truly, inside ourselves. So I often talk about the red thread, that runs through our lives, that deeper current of purpose that might have been buried within the busyness of life, and obviously now the chaos of life and everything moving and shaking around us. But I think when we reconnect to it, it becomes both our silk and our stone, our softness and our strength. And for me, that thread has always, actually, whether it's fiction or non-fiction or speaking or working in the field of business and leadership, it's always about inspiring courage. That's always been my red thread, even as a little girl, as a preacher on the streets at the age of 9. It was always wake up, wake up, and let's live on purpose and help people to stand steady, strong, and tall while the world is shaking around them. And I think, within my book, Claudette, on her journey, she discovers that same truth, that crisis actually can be a catalyst, and the ground has to shake before, anything can shift. And I wondered, Andrea, can I read a little excerpt from the book?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just
I'm sorry, I meant to ask you to do that. Sorry.
No, that's okay. But I'd love to bring people into her world, because I think that, it'll tell its own story. But let me just give you a little bit of the backstory. So the novel explores the story of Claudette. She's a French expat woman. She's beautiful, she's accomplished, but she's deeply unfulfilled. And in the eyes of society, she's got it all. She's got wealth, family, status, comfort, but she's very disconnected from herself and who she really is. And she meets a younger Cambodian man. His name is Som, and something long buried awakens within her, and she begins a journey that challenges every assumption that she has about love, about identity and freedom. So I want to share this short passage that captures the moment before everything begins to change for Claudette, where she's really caught between fear and longing. Miss Claudette, what a pleasure to hear from you. I'd be delighted to take you to the temples. I suggest an early start. Tomorrow morning, I'll pick you up at 5:30. Som. She sat on the edge of the four-poster bed and placed her mobile phone on the wooden side table inlaid with green leather. Som had replied almost instantly, transforming her initial enthusiasm into a tight knot of anxious pressure. Wrestling with her decision, the courage she felt moments before seeped through the cracks in her resolve in search of adventure elsewhere. She stood to regain control of her errant emotions, smoothed her dress over her thighs and walked towards the window. Heavy cream and golden curtains framed a mottled red and orange sky, casting a warm glow into her bedroom. Dusk was falling. Children splashed in the pool, and a woman, likely their mother, called out to beckon them inside. I should have gone home with my lovely children. Why did I contact him? What if something happens while I'm alone? What would Andrew say? Dread whispered fearful questions, tightening the knot of anxiety within her further. Yes, she wanted to go to the temples, but she didn't even know the man. She'd been rash, she'd been impulsive. She should stay at the hotel and recover. Walking back to the dressing table, she switched on the lamp and picked up her phone. She looked at it, then put it back down. She picked it up again, and with a trembling finger typed a message. Dear Som, I apologize, but I'm not feeling very well. I won't be able to go to the temples with you tomorrow. Claudette. Better safe than sorry. She pressed send. As she exhaled deeply, the disappearing message swept away her anxious stream of thoughts, and relief washed over her. There could always be another visit. And I think that this moment always strikes me because it captures that tension that so many of us feel when we are standing on the edge of change. We have that pull of desire and the weight of fear. And I think that's where reinvention starts. It's in that fragile space between the two.
Mm. Yeah. And then obviously reading her story before that and understanding her situation, it's like, go on, say yes, say yes.
Yeah, well, that's what you want the reader to be saying, don't you? You want people to be cheering her on, yeah, exactly.
But also understanding, she's about to rip everything apart.
Yeah.
So it's based on one woman's story. So what do you think the red silk dress teaches us about courage and adaptation?
Well, I think, whilst it is one woman's story and it is quite a personal, intimate journey, deeply written in the third person point of view, in her mind, you really get into her life and into her thinking, her feelings. But I do think it does mirror something that is quite universal. I think courage, when it rarely looks heroic in the moment, and it often can be quiet. It can be saying no when you've been conditioned to please, or yes when you're afraid. I think, that women have long been experts at this adaptation. It's how we've survived. But real courage, I think, begins when we move from adaptation to agency. When we start to step into our power. And when we stop trying to adjust to systems that are diminishing us and we start to create new ones. And it's really interesting because, but unbeknownst to me, I don't think as a writer, you go out thinking, I'm going to write this book with all these grand themes, of courage and transformation and everything else. But when you finish it and you read back and you start to see those underlying themes, it's not just about self-improvement or self-discovery. And the book and the themes of the book, I think, help to reveal that we transform as individuals so that we can have impact in the world around us. It's not just for our own personal development. It's so that we can be freer to impact the world, and hopefully in a positive way in whatever domain of life we feel called to have an influence. And that's what I'm hoping, I suppose, that the book will resonate with readers and give them that nudge, as you say.
Mm. Yeah, no, it's layered, the book. Like, you could read it as a great yarn, or you could take that deeper message away. And I think that'll be interesting to see how your audience responds, because I think it offers every possible layer, however far you're willing to take the message, right? Okay, so creativity is another big side of your message as well. So how does it help us as well through periods of uncertainty, and obviously that can be artistic, creativity, but leadership, daily life? Thoughts on creativity?
It's a very deep domain in itself, and I think that creativity can help us metabolize uncertainty in a way. It's whether we're writing, whether we're leading, whether we're having difficult conversations, we're always practicing faith in the unseen. And it's interesting, obviously, being brought up by faith healers and that whole essence of faith. That's that essence of what you cannot see, but you walk and you move towards it in the belief and in the hope, in the anticipation that what you're going to create will come to life. And when I started the book, I wrote it longhand. I wrote it with pen and paper. I wanted to be slow enough to stop and listen. And it's interesting, actually, there's a great TED talk about the connection between the pen or the handwriting and the brain and creativity, which I think a lot of us have lost because we just type, or we now speak into, dictate our words. But I used to read back passages, and later I would think, did I really write that? It's like the imagination, and this is what I think is something very special still, even in this world of artificial intelligence. Our imagination, our unique experiences of life, the things that we have observed or gone through personally, is just this well of creativity that we can draw from in order to bring out new things into the world. And I think that creativity is an act of surrender. It's surrendering to that bigger well and following that thread of curiosity and not really knowing where it's going to lead. You don't know when you start to write what's going to happen. It starts to evolve and shape and move forward, and the narrative of the story starts to take you further, and you think, wow, that's where that's where it's now gone. And so I think, even in teaching leadership, innovation, creativity, these aren't just processes. They're a way of posture. They're a way of living in the world, of being open, of having that imagination and a sense of humility in the world of the unknown. And I think we need that even more now to really draw forth from that well that's within us.
Oh, I love that. So another side of things, of course, is that we talk about a lot in today. You hear the word all the time, is authenticity. To the point, it's an overused term. When things become overused, people stop paying attention. But you run a workshop called Women Who Lead, and you're still running that from Portugal, right? Yeah. So, and I don't think this is just a female issue, because I've heard a lot of men tell me this as well, that they're scared to be fully themselves, because they're scared. And people who are intelligent are scared to be too intelligent, in the public domain, which I find a really interesting thing. It's like, why wouldn't you be proud of your intelligence? But it's intimidating to people, so that's why. But you deal with it a lot with women who are just, they don't know how to do it. They don't know how to step into their authentic power. So what do you think is the thing that, or the things that hold people back?
Yeah, I think, for a lot of women, and just a general sort of belief is that sort of strength or power is a very masculine thing, and that power can't exist with empathy or authenticity. But I think, real authentic power comes from this integration between softness and strength, the strategic and the soulful, if you like. And it's interesting because I feel like I'm going on my own journey, and have been on my own journey through writing this book, of really deeply exploring that. Because as you know, the book is highly sensual. It's highly feeling orientated. And obviously I'm going in deep to the feelings of this woman. And I've been in my work, in how I show up in the world, I tend to be more in the sort of that sense of let's go for it, let's drive it, let's move forward, more in that sort of power stance. What I call the warrior, we're the warriors. But actually that warrior and that lover combination, I think, is where real beauty and real power can take place, when we start to magnetize and attract, and rather than just pushing and driving, but knowing when to step into each of those in terms of having an authentic expression of yourself, I think is, that's a journey in itself. So, writing the book has deepened that understanding for me. And I think that, Claudette's reawakening her senses, her creativity, her sensuality, I began really reconnecting with my own. And that's taken me through a lot of those barriers of fear and things that can hold us back. And this is where creativity and courage, I think, are deeply entwined. And I think some of the barriers that can hold particularly women back, I think, is fear. I think it's this sense of the need to be perfect, the need to feel we've got it all together before we stand up or step out. And that's where we often do need courage. To have a go, to say yes to things more, and not to wait for that perfection. There's also a fear of being misunderstood, of losing a sense of belonging, or maybe stepping out from the comfort of life or the comfort of what is known, whether it's family or aspects of society. Sometimes, it's going to have that edge, isn't it, when we have that courage to lead and to stand out. And I think that the moment that we speak from that center of, instead of expectations, something profound can really happen, and it shifts in us, and it starts to affect and have that ripple effect on the world around us. There's some of the things that I would say around the female aspect.
Have you got an example of someone you've worked with, obviously speaking anonymously, where you felt that they were being held back by societal expectations, cultural upbringing, whatever, whatever, sexual repression? There's so many things, right? Where they flipped it around and sort of fully stepped into themselves. Could you think of an example beyond Claudette that really, because I know you're naturally that person, and it's why we resonated, right? But can you think of one? Because we both come across those women all the time, right?
Yeah, there's many women I've worked with, and I coach a lot of women around this. I think just in the professional context, women that are maybe in leadership roles, but they're sort of waiting for that permission, to take that next step from around them, whether it's their boss or other things, but to actually then say, no, I am good enough, and I can step into this next stage of my life and my career development, and being willing to do that and to push themselves forward. And I think that happened a lot, in terms of people just suddenly having the realization that they haven't got to wait. They haven't got to wait for permission. They haven't got to wait to be perfect. They haven't got to wait for it to be okay. That the time is now, and the time is right, to move forward. So I'd say there are many different types of examples of that happening. people either in an entrepreneurial sense or in a corporate sense, in their work and in their careers.
Yeah. And often female expectations around women hold them back too. So we've got three guys here. They've got wives. They've got daughters. I wanted to ask, have you got any thoughts? But just before we do, Steve said, "Congrats on the book." Pura, sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. Puria, saying hi. And Deborah Folks has said, as a writer herself, what you're saying is really resonating with her. So welcome to the review. Yeah.
Thank you.
Guys, any thoughts?
Plenty. Personally, I have never felt the need to hide my intelligence. Let's be clear about that, because I know exactly where it sits on the spectrum. So, but I think broadly speaking, and this might not necessarily be the case just for women, but broadly speaking, because of the expectations that are attached to us as people from quite an early age, depending wherever you are, what you do, there is always the inclination. And I think this comes particularly true when you're interviewing for a job. You actually try to take on the persona that is expected from you. And you do it in various environments, depending on who the people you are socializing with are. And I think everyone does it. I don't think anyone can totally abstain from doing it. It's just the level of how much do you stay true to yourself, or are you a total chameleon that just tries to adapt to whatever is expected from you in that particular moment, in that particular situation. I think everyone does it to some degree, but I would effectively label the authenticity argument is you stay true to who you are. And if people in that situation don't like you, it's because they don't like you, not who you're supposed to pretend you are. And that's fine. If they don't like me, they don't like me. I can live with that. But I think everyone does it.
What do you think, Natalie?
Well, yeah, I agree. I think that can certainly be the case. And I think, there's a sense where you move into new situations and you become a little bit of a chameleon. You're sensing, how do I need to then adapt in order to fit in around me to the expectations of different environments. And I think, to hold who you are in an authentic way, regardless of that. And I don't think that we should not do that. I think it's important to go in and observe our situations and to see, what am I walking into here? What do people value around me? And who am I in that context? Because I think the self does shift depending on context, And I can always remember, working in Singapore, and I was talking to a gentleman in one of my programs, and we were talking about personality and psychology, and I was saying, well, who are you, type thing, because we were talking about identity, and he said, well, it depends who I'm with. If I'm with my parents, I'm this. If I'm with my wife, I'm this. And with my family, I'm this. I'm with my boss, I'm this. The identity is something that can shift depending on the context, which is quite different from, say, more of the Western view of the self, which is, we are this atom that's just moving around of who we are, and we're always the same. And I think, the adaptation of who we are and remaining authentic to who we are is a very important aspect of having that, going back to that purpose about, what we're trying to be. But of course, with the sensitivity and the empathy of the environments in which we're working and we're living.
Yeah. So Deborah's saying here, there are no downsides to a man demonstrating high IQ. But as a woman, I have experienced very negative consequences. I have met men who it has been a negative for them. So I don't think it's just a women's thing, but I do think women suffer more from it.
Yeah. It goes back to the sort of job descriptions and thing. I was talking with someone the other day, and they were saying that they actually changed the job description because they found that and the roles, you know, were advertising jobs. They were trying to attract more women in, and they realised that, you know, a lot of men would apply for jobs because even if they don't think they can do all the job, all the things on the role, but a woman will look at it all and say, well, I could probably do 7 out of the 10 things on there, but, you know, I can't do those 3, so I'm not going to apply. Whereas the man will just say, well, yeah, I can do it, you know, that more bravado to just go and apply and wing it. And I think there can be that, you know, that sense that I've got to be competent, I've got to be perfect at everything before I sort of step in.
Yeah, I think it's something like women need to feel that they've got at least 80%, whereas men don't care. They just apply anyway. All right, so innovation. No. These are stats. It's not my opinion.
My 2 cents on this one, if you don't mind. You know, I find actually women carry too many women with them when they go about doing what they do. They have so many monkeys on their back. They're trying to belong. They're trying to stay and represent. They don't want to embarrass the tribe. They don't want to let anyone down. So and it's not just that they carry them with them. I think there is also a strong sense of it, as in like if you talk about who are more likely to go around in social packs. I think men play games in large groups, or women organize parties. You know, it's a different kind of a social thing. So there's a social pack, and because of that, there's a strong desire to belong. You know, in those packs. And there's sometimes a kind of a shared, I won't say victimization, but there's a kind of thing where you get together to be a support group around what you consider a difficult situation around you. And if you begin to break out of that situation, you're almost betraying the reason why you are that book club in the first place. Like, you know, like life is hard, but not really so much for me, and it's almost like you're breaking ranks. So I've always said that actually women's in corporate life, many times I've seen women be the worst enemies of women. Actually, they're all we're probably in different environments as well. When we talk about when we're amongst speakers and thought leaders, that environment is so supportive. Everyone's really pushing forward and very happy for everyone else's success. But I've found that kind of thing where, you know, if you're pushing too hard, if you are being too aggressive, the women are the ones who actually, you know, I hear it being put to the guys who said, oh, they find those women too aggressive. But I find a lot of women find other women too aggressive. They find women temper other women.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting reflection, and also shows the importance that women's roles are, you know, in family, mothers in particular, friends. You know, I think of my mother relationship, because my mother was she was a pioneer, you know, so she had that attitude of go, have a go, try it, do it, you know. And so I always grew up with that sense of, you know, don't be scared to be different. Don't be scared to break away from the crowd. But I think if you've got either a mother or sisters or friends that sort of, you know, don't want you to be different, they want you to be the same as them, or they're holding you back in some way. So it becomes then very hard, because you're going to have to break away in some respects to have courage. Whatever it might be that you're breaking away from, to step away from, to say this, I've got to do something different in order for my life to have a bigger meaning, a bigger impact. And that can be, you know, create huge tension and huge dilemma in particular women.
Yeah, and the courage to leave people behind, right? Yeah, totally. Well, totally get it. And Joe, I totally hear you, but like, it's not all women, right?
Oh yeah. No. I know. Yeah. That's why I meet a lot of women who go. They can't see that perspective because they're not like that, right? but they also don't. At the same time, that there is also that, right? So that's the thing. We seldom can see what is a deficiency elsewhere because we don't feel that way. So in like, when I was in Australia, despite everyone saying in my circles, they're saying that, oh, there's racism, and I really couldn't agree. I really couldn't sense it because for whatever reasons, I didn't feel that was the case. Now I look back objectively, I can go like, oh yeah, okay, I can see it, but it wasn't something that was apparent to me because I had a different set of glasses on.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so let's move on to innovation. So that's obviously one of your areas of expertise. And usually when we hear about innovation, it's always technology's at the center of it, and obviously AI is in the mix of that conversation now. So how do we reframe it and put people and purpose in the center of that message rather than the tech?
Yeah, absolutely, and very much so now. And I'm really proud actually that, I mean, I created the 6 Eyes of Innovation back in 2009, and it's got purpose right in the center of it. And back then we weren't even really talking about purpose so much as what we are these days. But I call it a purpose-centered approach to innovation. So for those of you listening who don't know the 6 Eyes, it's a model which has six different distinct phases of the journey that opportunities and ideas travel through. So we have identify, ignite, investigate, invest, implement, improve, and in the center of the model is purpose, linked with 2 triangles of culture and process. And so the philosophy is, if we're going to build more people and purpose-centered approaches, we need to create the processes, the systems, and the cultural environments that stimulate not just creativity with Ignite, but commitment with implementation, for example. So we've got these different phases of journeys of where ideas are traveling and what they need in order to move them forward closer to actually becoming realized in the world. And so I think that when we start to think more broadly as innovation as a people-centered approach to change, to transformation, it's, it isn't just how we do things, but why are we doing them? Not all innovation is good, actually. And so, why? What is the deeper reason, the deeper purpose that is driving that change or that new idea that you want to work on? And for whom? For whom are you innovating? And what's the larger impact of what you want to create? And is it going to make life more humane, more connected, more meaningful? Is it going to have a positive impact on people and on planet? And these are difficult questions. They're not easily answered. It's something I think you have to grapple with quite deeply. And I spoke in TEDx in Marvilla in Lisbon earlier this year in March. That's what I focused my whole 10 minutes. I spent 3 months of my life practicing for all that 10 minutes on that stage. In a sense, our technological evolution has outpaced our psychological evolution, and we can't keep up. It's like it's going so fast, and our brain and our ability to actually deal with the complexity that technology is now giving is sort of out of kilter, and that makes things very, very difficult. It's all about, if we can start to really go back to purpose and start to think about how can we invest in organizations that are really grappling with these issues and trying to have a positive impact on the world. I talk about a company called Not Plastic in my TEDx, and how they were grappling with how can they reduce plastic waste in the oceans in particular. But really looking at what's driving behind it, and is it going to have a positive impact on people and planet? And that's why it's at the center of the 6 Eyes of Innovation. Purpose sits there, because efficiency without meaning, or profitability without meaning, or productivity without meaning, or creativity without meaning is empty. So innovation at its best is when people are flourishing, when good things are happening, that we're really using our intelligence, our skills, our gifts to really impact the world in a positive way. And man, do we need that now. We really need that. And that's why we need courage, because I think a lot of people are good people, and if the good people stood up more and did more, then we would have a powerful effect collectively. If we don't,
exactly.
Standing back and sort of hoping that things might change.
Yeah, I mean, you see it with the tech bros, right? I grew up in the tech industry. We were always the good guys. Now they're like the devil incarnate, and they're really not moving forward in a positive way. They're just not, And just before I was reading a Substack story about a guy that used to work at YouTube, and he was remembering the early days when it was about society and doing good, and then it's just become this poison chalice that's breaking apart our democracy. So I think you need to get your course over to Silicon Valley and start hammering it home, because it really feels like they lost their way. It's funny. I want to reach out to a whole bunch of people in the tech industry I've known all my life and just say, what are you guys seeing? What are you thinking? Because it just feels wrong. It's so wrong. I mean, how do you feel like when you think of your message that you've had, but you've been pushing for a long time? How are you feeling now when you're up against this? It's like me with my social leadership message. It didn't matter. I didn't change the path, right? I tried, but how do you feel like when you're up against this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was in Web Summit over the last 3 days in Lisbon. 75,000 tech entrepreneurs, investors, leaders, all sorts of people there. So it's a massive, massive event. And the last speaker of the whole session was Tim Berners-Lee. And he was obviously talking about where we are now, and he was saying, what we need is like this reset, a reset of the internet, and how what he's now trying to pioneer, actually, which I think was very hopeful, in that sense, saying that him and the organizations that he's in now are really trying to pioneer new ways that will help reclaim digital sovereignty of the individual and the empowerment of the individual away from the big platforms, which obviously have taken all our data, and who knows what's really going on. So it's a sort of a scary time, and I think it's also a very, because I'm an optimist, I have to view the world with optimism. I have to go into it thinking that things can change, that we have powerful agency as humans to affect and to shape what we are creating right now. But of course, there are massive influences that are not that positive, and that's why. And it was interesting right at the very end. The guy that was with him, with Tim Berners-Lee on the stage, he basically just put his hand out into the audience, and he said, "You are it. Don't just look to us. You have to take this. You are tech engineers. You're working in this whole space. What you're designing, how you're designing it. You've got to have that strong moral value-led approach to design." And be thinking about the impact, the human impact, the societal impact, the sustainability impact of what you create. And don't just sort of go on this race to dominate and have dominance without really thinking about these things. And everyone just started to applaud. I mean, it was very, very moving, because these are people that really pioneered the whole of the internet. And now they're sort of saying, and it was lovely to hear the humility, the grace, and that sense of strong inner values that are still driving people like them. And hopefully they are going to have a bigger macro impact because of their influence and their power in the world. But for the rest of us that are doing things, that are grabbing with these things, we have to do that too. We have to. We can't sit back and just wait for things to unfold and be thrown at us. So that's how I feel. A bit of a mix.
And for those, Tim Berners-Lee, right? It was Tim, right? I actually worked with him once, many, many years ago. He is an amazing guy, but he's basically the guy that's credited with founding the World Wide Web. So for those who don't know or don't remember or are too young, that's where it comes from. So I suppose it kind of almost leads into the question of what should give you as well as us, or what should give us as well as you hope.
Well, optimism does help, but it's also commitment. I think we have to feel committed, and have to have that sense of confidence and assurance that we can evolve into a better state. And it's not just a predetermined outcome of going down this sort of tube into despair, and I think that we have to continue to keep choosing, to keep creating, even when the world feels chaotic, when it's moving beneath our feet. And it was I think what was really interesting as well in Web Summit over the last few days was I sort of prompt myself, because it's so overwhelming being in that space with all these thousands of people and this cacophony of noise. I prompted myself down in the marketing stage, because it has like its own little space away from all the other noise. And there were so many really good speakers that were talking about, in a sense, the rise of the human. The rise of the human right now amid all of this technological disruption, and the importance of our humanity, and how there are trends, there are sort of movements towards, going back to sort of really reclaiming our human identity, and obviously empathy, connection, the senses, storytelling, all of these things are deeply human. And I think if we have a growing consciousness around compassion, reclaiming our voice, our power, and even this sort of the next generation that are really looking more for purpose, just more than just money or profitability, the world might be a noisy place, but it can be a quiet revolution, hopefully going underneath the surface, of us choosing integrity, beauty and courage. And I think, well, that's what gives me, the strength to keep going, to keep doing the work. And as I move more deeply, into the world of fiction, which is a very different domain for me, I'm about to I have a lot of courage now to step out. It's a very vulnerable thing to do, to write fiction, because it's really you have poured out your heart. You have gone deep into the emotions of characters and created a world. And I hope that my book, The Red Silk Dress, will not only move readers, but embolden them, to trust the creative impulse, to listen deeply to what's whispering their name, what's calling them, and to have the courage really to follow it.
I love that. I liked integrity, beauty, courage. I thought that was a good combination of words. No, I think we've gotten to the crisis point of enshittification. And it's a term that's used for the tech industry, but I think the entire business world has become enshittified. And and that it's not just how they serve their customers, it's also how they pollute Earth, and so I think that human movement, I totally agree, but it's people feeling empowered enough and angry enough and passionate enough to really start stepping up. And then I think until I see that mass movement of people responding, that's why when people say, give me hope, Andrea, I'm like, hope without action is just a dream.
Absolutely.
So it's the action, until it's operating at a scale that I know is commensurate with the crisis, then it's just, so, but I'm with you. I'm totally with you. But before we wrap up, guys, David, you've been quiet. Any thoughts from anyone?
Plenty.
Yeah.
I mean, congratulations first of all on the book. I mean, it's amazing to go there, and I think it's a fantastic read. It's a great time for everybody thinking about getting a present for someone. I imagine it would be a brilliant thing to do. I hear all this, and I come from a family of three sisters. I've got kind of obviously my mum and daughters and things, and I'm listening a bit to kind of what Joe's saying and other things. I'm not sure that they carry more of their own baggage and stuff around with them. I've got a very amazing wife, so maybe that's why. And she really is. And and I think my daughter's amazing too. But they, my eldest did go through a long period of kind of like a lack of identity, and I wonder whether that's and I don't think I ever felt that. I felt not so much a lack of identity, but just lost, which I think is different. And I think that I wonder whether that's a distinction that's quite important in that way. So I always felt kind of like, an identity but lost, as opposed to lack of identity and therefore not knowing where to be or whatever.
And what helped her to regain that? What in terms of moving in? She said she was that. Has she moved out of that now? Has she found herself in that sense?
I think so. Yeah. I think so. I mean, there's obviously, and it was a long and very difficult journey in that way, and I think having something to be able to. I think there's no one answer to it. I don't think it's possible to say it was that or it was this or it was something in that sense. So it's almost like there's a kind of an innovation of ourselves.
There is, yeah.
Think of kind of what you were talking about, your the innovation steps and in a way.
Yeah.
And it's sorry.
No, I was just going to say, when we think of storytelling and we think of the inciting incident, as it's called in the story, it's that moment of the catalyst of change that sends the character off on their journey, and it's going to go up and down and up and down. And in a sense, the power of story is the character coming back to themselves, but they're not going to go back to what they were before. They're always going to be going on and up to whatever, unless it's a tragedy or something, going on to that next phase. And I think a lot of it is about feeling lost in good storytelling. It's the disconnection that the character has with themselves, that things are not going well. There's something amiss. And then the story becomes that reclamation of who they are and who they can be. And often, as we get towards the end of the story, when the tipping point happens again, when they have to have that resolution and they're going to go into battle and they're going to have to step into courage, they're going to have to make a decision, and then boom, off they go again on their journey. So thank you for sharing that.
So I just want to. I'll give you a break. I'm just trying to give you a break from being on the main screen. But one of the things I know from my life is, in order to find who you are, you've got to basically disconnect from everything and sometimes that's leaving people behind. Sometimes permanently, but forever changed, right? And one of the things that I always say to people, just get out. Even if you come from a great family, just create some space so you can work out who you are without everybody else's input on who you are. Because, wherever you grow up, there's all this input coming at you and people defining who you are. And until you've got the space. So for me, it was traveling and just leaving home and basically never coming home. But I needed to go and spend time in my head, to do that. But there was sacrifice with that. I lost things, and I mourn what I lost to this day. But at the same time, I wouldn't have been able to, find my path without it. So, to become who you are does require letting go of things that maybe are comfortable, but not necessarily serving you. So, what's your advice to people who, just they're comfortable, but they're not connected with themselves, but they're also a little bit scared to say goodbye to that comfort.
Yeah, and I think that's a very real feeling. And I think that's where it can also go back to that sort of red thread, the red thread of purpose, I like to call it, or even the red thread of desire, that which is wanting you to move. I think if you listen really deeply to yourself, so what you love, what you really want, what your desire line is, in a sense, and if that has a voice inside of you, and you listen to it and you say, okay, I am going to have to leave this in whatever this is in order to move towards this desire, then it can help, I think, because you can see the benefit of where you are going to move to, even though, and that goes back to faith, I think, again, and the curiosity, following curiosity, and that requires courage, because you don't know what's going to happen, you don't know the outcome, you don't know the goal necessarily, but you feel it. There's this sense of this emotional aspect inside of you that's tugging you, that's pulling you, and saying, now is the time. Now's the time to move forward. And in some ways, we can then look at what we leave or what we decide to change in ourselves and in our environment, and see what it gave us at that point and why we were there. But then we can also look back at it, like you say, about, you can look back and you feel that it can be mourning for some things. It's not like it's always, oh, fantastic, I've got rid of all of that. There's that sense of loss, but then there's also a sense of growth and a sense of possibility about who we can be when we actually step out into the unknown.
And also accepting that sometimes it can be a shit ride, like Claudette goes through a shit ride there. It's not, but that's part of it too. And accepting the discomfort, I think is important, because she left wealth and then had to find her own way, right? And that's a lot of people don't have the courage to do that. But the discomfort is part of the journey. So embracing the discomfort, I think, is a good thing to do as well.
Yes, absolutely. And to know that too. On my women's leadership retreats, I use the sort of the change curve, and we have the alpha state, the beta state, the gamma state, the delta state, the new alpha state. So the alpha state being, life hunky-dory, everything's going well, it's wonderful time. And then the beta comes in, that catalytic moment, that crisis or that change that sets you off on the journey down the gamma into despair, into the darkness of, the dark night of the soul. And you can stay down there for quite a while, but then you can come up the delta, which is the moment of possibility, of opportunity, of new things. And then you're always going to be in the new alpha, not in the old alpha. You're going to be in that level of difference, of change above, when you look back to the old alpha, you go, wow, that's where I was, and this is who I am and where I am now on this other plateau. And of course, the next beta will happen. And they're happening faster and faster now because of the state of change. We're all characters, aren't we? We're all characters in stories of our lives, and we all have choices and agency and power to determine our own path within that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. All right, I know you've got to leave us, but just some final reflections on courage, beauty, and the red thread of purpose.
Yeah, well, I think that's ultimately what the Red Silk Dress is about. And for those who want to read it, it will come out in February. Actually, I have set the date as February the 14th. Because it's a love story to yourself. It's a love story to yourself. And I think whether you're leading teams, whether you're raising families, whether you're, rebuilding yourself, or you're in crisis, whatever, it's always about going back and remembering who we are before fear, before expectations, before all the noise of the world around us, and finding courage. Finding courage to take that next step, to listen to the call, to be in your own story, to be the agent of change in your own life, and to live from that place.
Yeah, nice. And to be uncomfortable. It's okay to be uncomfortable while you're doing it, right? Yeah. All right, Natalie, thank you so much. I hope everyone enjoyed that. I can't wait for the book to come out. It's really a fantastic read.
Thank you.
that's from someone who doesn't really read that much fiction. So no, it's awesome. But thank you.
Thank you for having me on your show, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Goodbye.
All right, we'll leave her in peace. Yeah, that was good.
Yeah, inspiring.
That was great. Yeah, definitely. One of my common sort of concerns is, especially with younger people, the way they talk about life and their traumas and that sort of stuff is the ability to make a decision in your life that leads you through a period of discomfort, and welcoming that rather than being too scared to actually face the discomfort. That's something that concerns me, because I know what growth you can get from accepting the discomfort of the journey. You know, I always say to my husband, I regularly set off an explosion in our life, and we change everything, and it unsettles everyone for a really long time, and then we settle, and then I set off another explosion, and the next thing comes. But I know the growth that comes through it, so I embrace it, and I hope my boys have got that. I think they have. I think I think it's impossible for them not to have had it. This move back to Singapore was really hard for them, and I think it was hard to watch them go through it, but good that they went through it. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, I guess I can use that when I reflect back on the life that I gave my family as well. I moved them 10 times, and they were just in Singapore.
Yeah, we're moving so shit. But you moved a lot.
Moving is good. I mean, moving is good. I always think that, you know, in Hong Kong we used to move a lot, partly because, well, I'm not sure why, partly, but anyway, so that was the case. We went to the UK, and we moved a fair bit all along. I think, you know, I was sort of thinking I never stayed anywhere more than like a couple of years, as it were, kind of thing. And my parents actually moved house whilst I was at university without me knowing. So that was also another thing. So I had to find them afterwards, and this was before mobile phones. In 1980s, in 1980s. So I think moving in the end is kind of like interesting challenges.
Yeah. Well, you don't accumulate stuff when you move a lot.
Well, I've stayed in the place for too long. I accumulate a lot of stuff now. So.
Yeah,
I like keeping stuff. You know, you never know when it's going to come handy, right? So
that's not your kid stuff, right?
No.
Yeah, no, it was great, and Natalie's she's awesome. So the book is fantastic. I would recommend you all buy it for your wives. They will enjoy it. You might enjoy it yourselves, but I think
I'm sure.
Yeah. All right.
I might be afraid you get so inspired by it.
Yeah, I'll tell you I'll tell you privately the benefits for you personally. So let's get on to the news that you guys don't know I'm going to talk about yet. So this is the news we're not going to discuss. So the week kicked off with Super Typhoon Uwan, which that's what its name was in the Philippines, but it was more broadly called Funwong. And we know it impacted the Philippines, and it displaced 1.2 million people. We're still not really sure how many people have died. It's gone on to drench Taiwan, which, based on another story we're about to tell you, is good for the semiconductor industry. But the silence for days after this storm and after Hurricane Melissa, you know, there's this period of silence where we don't really know. There's only one video clip of waves lashing into a hotel. You know, we don't really know what's going on, and we still don't really know the impact, even up in the villages up in Jamaica. I saw a story on social media about a Japanese lady marrying her AI, and yeah,
people marry themselves as well, so it's kind of, you know,
but apparently we're already seeing divorce rates starting to increase because people are falling in love with their AIs, and infidelity with AI is basically largely undefined at this point. Japan's
we're not the comedy show, are we?
Yeah, this is news. Japan's new prime minister is facing backlash. So there was a bit of a China incident recently, but she forced her staff to attend a 3 a.m. meeting. And it's created backlash because it's a country where people have literally worked themselves to death. There's a terrible story starting to circulate, and it's discussing rich sniper tourists who allegedly paid $90,000 to shoot civilians. And if it was children, they paid even more during human safari trips to Sarajevo during the war in the 90s. So Italy's hearing this case, but it actually involves multiple countries. So there are demons amongst us. Scientists are reporting that we are witnessing the beginning of the collapse of Antarctica. And Iceland is now on alert for the collapse of the AMOC, which they are citing as a national security concern, which it is. Younger women voters in the US are repulsed by MAGA, and this is all the exit polls from the last sort of week or two, but apparently not older women. And I wonder if this is part of the push to try and appeal the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. A fortune teller has been arrested in Australia over a $46 million scam. It's really interesting. I recommend reading that. And finally, sexism is alive and well, as the best man for the job, a woman, who was set to become the first woman in Naval Special Warfare Command to oversee the Navy SEALs, is no longer getting the job, literally because she's a woman. The men who have worked for her and worked with her are all outraged by this. So I was in the military in the early 90s. And when you listen to what the women in the military are saying now about what's happening, it really takes me back to that 80s, 90s sort of sexism, anti-female stuff that was going on. And, you know, you think of how much further we've moved since, and it's really a sign of how quickly things can go back. And I just think we should all be paying much more attention to that, because that is not in any of our interests, male or female or other. It's not in any of our interests. So we need to keep moving forward. So, yeah, that's the news. Anything not in the agenda that you guys have picked up? David, you'd obviously seen the Italian story about the sniper tourists.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Very disconcerting. It's those. Anyway, I don't think this is. I think I don't want to give airtime to it. So about the brother died. I noticed a bridge collapsed in China. This new bridge. Yeah. And I'm trying to understand better about why. But what was interesting was the comments that was associated with it. So there's a new bridge in Sichuan, in Hongji. It's a very long bridge, like 800-kilometer long kind of thing. And there was supposed to be something like either bedrock collapse or the landslide or whatever. But all the comments to it in the kind of report that I can find is about how it's all the fault of people it's all kind of the design problem about, you know, the engineers and all the rest of it in that way. My brother-in-law is a civil engineer, and he does all these tunnels and stuff and so on. And pretty much, I'm sure that a lot of them, you know, they pay a lot of attention to these things.
Especially in China, right?
Yeah, and there is kind of a sense in people's mind that somehow we can always anticipate everything and control everything. And that came out for me from that. This new bridge, it's only been open a few months. Yeah. So it's not like it's been there for, 50 years. It's finally collapsed.
And it was closed when it happened. But my understanding is it was something to do with the bedrock. But that's also a design failure that they didn't recognize.
Yeah, but I think the point is there are always design failures in our lives. And when we think about trying to find massive solutions to complex problems, and we think we can design a solution and get it right first time, which is this bridge, I think it brings out kind of our hubris.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's the sort of disaster that we'll see an execution.
I hope not.
It does happen, especially if there's corruption at the center of it, any shortcuts. people putting money in their pockets, which of course is a big problem in this part of the world, right?
Yeah.
And China's cracking down on corruption. I'm not saying that's what's happened, obviously, but yeah, it was an interesting story. Yeah. Anything else jump out at you guys?
Well,
nothing immediately comes to mind. Joe?
Not really
No,
for me.
He gets his news from us, remember?
Yep. I'm watching the news right now.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so we are going to talk about what's going on with the BBC. So I when it broke, I think it was on Monday morning, I immediately sent a message to you guys, and David, you responded, and it was interesting what you said, because Joe and I are outside of the UK, so you're going to have a view. Both of you are going to have a view because you're in the UK. But there's also a lot of stories wrapped around this one, and it's not as straightforward as everyone seems to be thinking. The initial stories, that the responses were very, that real focus on the things like the Trump cuts, which later, just today, I you wouldn't have had time to read it because I sent another one. What's his name? Prescott? Is he the guy that released the report? Prescott.
No,
in that
it's a leaked
report,
yeah.
a leaked report, but in that report, he also toned down Trump's words. So he's done what he accused the BBC of doing. So anyway, that's just an aside. There's a lot to this story, and the reason I believe it requires attention is because there's a war on information. The right wing is winning the war. It's a dangerous time for all of us, because, and I've got a couple of we've shared this before, and I'm going to just quickly show you. Where is it? So this is the media's bias chart, which has come up. Yep. That is released by this company called Adfonts Media, right? So you can see right in the middle, in the green box, the BBC is right smack bang in the middle of that green box. But what you can see, and if you go to the website, there's so much more, but look how much lower down the right wing goes compared to the left wing. But the media...
This is news value and reliability versus left and right.
Yes,
okay, so
right.
BBC is up there about third down. So USA Facts at the top, and then Indie, Star, and kind of BBC below that. And AP News and BBC and ABC News kind of right around there. Fox News, interesting, just to the right of it.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's the same level of kind of news value and reliability.
Yeah, where Fox was kind of a bit surprising, but the important thing is the ones in the green box are considered, and some people don't support these charts and the companies behind them. So the other one, which we've shared before, is the influence in the world of right wing versus left wing, and we've showed this before. This is a more recent version of it, and this is influences. The dominant message, the dominant is right wing, right? And so we're living in a right wing world now, okay? And so that's central to the conversation. But I wanted to ask David and Richard, from your perspective, you will have had that's probably all everyone's talking about. So who wants to start?
Actually, I'm not sure how much people are talking about that. I mean,
not an awful lot. There are some, you can overhear it on the train, but it's not something that's central, to discussions as such. I do think it's very important for many reasons what's going on. I think it's virtually impossible to have unbiased media. BBC claims that they are unbiased, but over the years, when you have long shifts of governments, you had basically 14 years of Labour when I moved to this country, and that was followed by 15 years of Conservatives. You are going to appoint people that are more aligned with your line of thinking. So you are going to have this spectra of it being officially unpolitical, but that perforates through the whole apparatus of civil servants. To claim that civil servants are non-political is basically completely bogus. Because if you're in charge of the appointments, you are going to appoint people that are aligned with your thinking more so than people that are opposite to your thinking. So first of all, I think you need to accept that fact, and that effectively when you have general elections and regime change, you need to fire a lot of civil servants. I think that's just what you have to do, because otherwise you get implementation problems with your general politics. And I don't think BBC was any different. So that raises the next question. Should you have a fee or, publicly funded news organization that all of a sudden you have to accept is somewhat politically biased? Maybe not. In Italy, you have the opposite problem, that you're only allowed to transmit news through the state television. You're not actually allowed to run news channels if you're a private corporation, which we are allowing in the UK. I can see arguments for both, but I think you need to come to the acceptance that news cannot possibly be totally unbiased. That's my main thing about the whole BBC agenda. And people who are claiming the opposite either don't face the facts, or for other reasons, they don't want them to come to light. And then you have a general problem with news, which is that young people don't tend to watch it very much. And the people in charge are frightened of this because they're losing their audience, like any, television program. Losing audience is not great. So you are trying from the news room to make the whole program more appealing to a younger generation by basically making it more entertainment-like than factual reporting-like. And that's a huge problem. Because there is no money in actual investigative journalism. There is no money for it because people are not prepared really to pay for it. And when all those worlds collapse, you end up with a situation like the one BBC ended up with over Trump.
David?
Well, I think there are different levels of problems, but the fundamental core one, I think, for me, in some sense, is what's the BBC for? And I think it has lost its identity in that way. It's related to what Richard's talking about in terms of how it's been managed through technocrats, and how those technocrats have their kind of particular agendas through the political appointments and so on. It's lost that through the fact that the audience has changed along the way. But I think there's something much more fundamental at the heart of this, which is, if you talk of impartiality and the BBC, I would define that as the sense of kind of like a fairness, but a very specific sort of fairness, not just a general sort of fairness, but the kind of fairness of that's just not cricket kind of fairness. If you follow.
That's great.
Which is the Britishness of it. It's just not cricket. And it has lost that. And that's what people really look to it for, is the BBC, is the British Broadcasting Corporation. It's about playing fairly in that way.
Can I ask you a question, David? Has it lost the trust because it's deserved to lose it, or is it lost the trust because there's a campaign to bring it down?
I think it has lost the trust because it has lost its sense of that fairness.
Yeah, agree.
The rest then follows. When you lose that core, it's like Pilates and core strength. When you lose that core, what happens is your body overcompensates with, your legs and your hips and everything else, because you've lost the core being, your core strength. And so you get all these aches and pains, and then you end up trying to defend against that in one way or another. And that has been going on over the past decade, two decades in that way. And as media has changed and the situations around it has changed, instead of being able to hold back onto what that core is, in terms of its programming, in terms of its messaging, in terms of what it does, it has lost that along. So what people really are looking for, the sense of it, is not that it is impartial in the way that American media, journalistic media, is about showing all voices. It's meant to be impartial in the sense of saying that's just not cricket, pointing out things in that way.
Yeah, I agree. I think what you're describing is 100% correct, and it's partially being driven there for purely commercial reasons, despite not being a commercial channel, and it's because they're losing their viewing numbers. And when that happens, you being put in charge, you're trying to find other ways of regaining that audience, that actually, if you stay true to yourself and your purpose, it will come back. But you're trying to adapt here to a changing world. And by doing so, you're effectively abandoning your position. And I think it's detrimental. I think BBC is on a slippery slope. Personally, I would just mercy kill it. I don't see any purpose of it, existing anymore after this.
Wow. All right. Well, so I want to share a few things with you. So the BBC is the most trusted media in the US after the Weather Channel.
Yeah.
Right. So the first thing that Carolyn Levitt did is tell their audience to get off BBC and go and watch GB News. Right. So when we hear about the political manipulation, the right-wing push that's happening behind the scenes, there's a lot to that story that I think is worth paying attention to. There's commentary saying that, because it's all about this supposed bias towards the left, which that was one of the things that's like, what? Because as a person looking in, Nigel Farage is always on. The left-leaning Green voices get no coverage. The climate conversation is barely legible on the channel. So that claim of it being left-leaning just doesn't actually stack up. But one of the journalists inside said, basically the BBC is not intellectually equipped to deal with the changes in the media and political landscape in the 21st century. So I thought that was a really interesting thing. And then, of course, with the Conservative government in power for such a long time ago, so Richard, you said last 10, 20 years, it's basically been the period of austerity. The Conservative government, of which it is deeply afraid, and the seeds of much of the contemporary crisis is being sown from that. So, the panorama thing. So in the past, that story wouldn't get basically any attention, but in today's media world, it gets this hysterical attention. And before we came on, you were talking about it, Richard. It was just this little thing, right, that didn't make any difference. He still got elected. And like I said, the person who wrote the report also changed Trump's words in the report. So, I mean, there's a lot to it. So we've got Ollie here, like saying BBC made an ass with idiot splicing of Trump. However, this could be their finest hour if they doubled down on climate crisis, a risky but necessary strategy to face off Trump on climate. I actually think the BBC is one of the most important media groups in the world, and we have to do everything that we can to save it. Has it screwed up? Is it perfect? Of course it's not. But there is nothing else like it in the English-speaking world. There is nothing else like it, and we need it. But we
absolutely need it, but we don't need it in its current form.
Exactly. And changed, right?
Yeah, it's like, to me, there is absolutely zero doubt that there's a complete stitch up of Trump.
Yeah.
When you see the editing, this is done absolutely purposely to portray it as he was inciting the riot, how it's been edited. However, I am not absolutely sure that has any left-leaning bias or any anti-Trump per se message. I think that is the commercial force saying, how can we make this spicier and more exciting? So people actually turn on our channel to watch this.
Yeah.
That to me is my first thought. You are turning news into entertainment. And it's an incredibly slippery slope, because then you lose your purpose of why you actually run a news channel. And unless BBC's... Sorry?
Is Panorama News?
Well, it's supposed to be
investigative journalism. Investigative journalism. It was always sort of investigative journalism, and it's not the 9 o'clock news in that way, but it's meant to be that in-depth investigative journalism, except for the episode when it talked about the spaghetti crisis in Italy, when the harvest was down. This was on April the 1st, when some years back, when they were talking about how the Italian harvest of spaghetti trees were down.
So a lot of
also that ability to have the right kind of humor in that way, and that's also lost. There's no humor in the BBC.
No,
and that used to have a lot of that witticism in there, and you need that in order to be really hard hitting about your news.
Yeah, I agree. So this journalist who said it's a textbook example of how populists win. We have the ridiculous carnival of Donald Trump and Boris Johnson, of all people, admonishing the BBC for its lack of integrity. And they can get away with it because no one expects anything from them. And yet we expect everything from the people and places who actually give a damn. And then the other comment was the tendency to move right is always stronger than the left, because there is terror of the right in a way the BBC does not possess of liberalism or the left. Do we honestly believe anyone inside the BBC fears the Green Party or Labour? And this is part of the story too, right? There's a political machinations going on here, because the biggest win of populism would be to take down the BBC. That would be a huge victory for them, because we need them. We really need them.
No, but I would, I wouldn't say that was the case. I wouldn't say that, just because populism or whatever the form it is, the right or the left or whichever it is, takes down the BBC as such. I mean, that has been ongoing for a long time, and in many respects, again, going back to what I was saying about his sense of fairness or his sense of it's not cricket, as the voice to speak out in that way, is given up on that for a long time. It's still seen in many ways in that way. But if I actually want to go along and find about coverage of information around the world, Asian news channels are much better at that. And if I want to find out about, kind of in-depth studies of kind of one thing or another, there are loads of things on kind of YouTube and other things which genuinely are very good in that respect. But a lot of those sort of things that you talk about, in some sense, they're not there in the BBC. But what is meant to be there in the BBC is this sense of kind of that gravitas and authority, in a way that created the Commonwealth, that said, okay, what we will do instead is create a Commonwealth, and let's kind of bring that together, that unity in some sense, but guided by a sense of kind of fairness in business, in life, in politics, in economics, in all of those things, and calling it out when it's not. And that's the part of it that has been lost. So, and I think what we have to remember, one very important part of it is we fixate on mistakes. So, just as to the comments on the bridge and all those things, we talk about taking down this or losing that or whatever it is. And I think the essence of what makes it very important is not losing to the populism or whatever, but we cannot progress without mistakes. We cancel everything just because of a mistake. Then what you do is you halt all progress. And that's why we're in this crisis, is because we've halted all progress, because we don't allow anyone to make any mistakes.
Yeah. So I was just trying to look back to where this article was published, because there's so much that's been coming out this week, which I've shared with you. But Ollie's sort of saying, the Panorama show was never aired in the US, right? And and we actually won't be able to watch it. But apparently the show was, overall, it was positive towards Trump. It was just this 12 seconds that's being sort of flagged. Sorry, I'll get you off, David. So an opportunity to make a big deal out of it. But basically one of the comments is saying, what's his name? Tim Davey. So he was constantly bowing down and accepting that there was this liberal bias within the BBC, and Turnus too, who was the head of news, and they were bending over backwards to reassure the populists, the transphobes, and the immigrant bashers. And their appeasement basically failed catastrophically, because it could never have exceeded. Nothing encourages a bully like allowing yourself to be bullied. The BBC, for all its flaws and mistakes and questionable hiring decisions, can never be that, which is why the right-wing populists seek to destroy it. It is the biggest prize in the information war. One of the foundational errors of this Labor government made was passively inheriting a slate of Tory appointees to public bodies, including the BBC, but I think Gibb has badly overplayed his hand. And other people are talking about it as a coup from within the BBC. So, there's a lot of different angles to this story. But from a polycrisis perspective, protecting our information, we are already in a world where the media is dominated by right-wing voices. In the US, a lot of the left-wing voices have now been sold and have turned into right-wing voices. David Ellison, Larry Ellison's son, just recently did that big acquisition. So we have to protect anything that's sitting in the middle or to the left, because we don't have enough representation for those voices now. And that's the risk, because we need, if we want to have a fair and balanced society, we need to have space for fair and balanced voices, and we don't. And the left-wing voice is not aggressive. It's not. It's just. I think it needs to become aggressive.
I think we're losing the idea of dialogue here. We're losing this aspect where everything is left or right wing. We as people have complex motivations. We're not just left wing or right wing. Sometimes we're both, and we live with that contradiction, and we actually thrive on that contradiction. So I think what gets lost here is that there is a person in a position of power that has gone and kind of thrashed about and chucked toys out of the pram, and everyone is scared of that as a result of it. And in consequence of that, everything is like, oh gosh, we shouldn't do that, or you can't do this, and we're going to sue you. And the reason why that's the case is because this person chucking toys out of the pram goes around and sues everybody and tries to use everything in his power to go along and kind of cancel everyone else and basically deride them in every way. That's just a person who doesn't know how to behave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that person's president of the United States, right?
And the conversation here is really about how we respond to those things. That's the point about it. It's not about how we made a mistake. We made a mistake, but what everybody's bringing up is like it's just falling into the attention that person wants. And the issue at the BBC is deeper and longer standing. It has been going on for a long while, as Richard was describing.
Yeah.
It is not this one incident in that way. It has lost a core.
Yeah.
It has lost for various reasons.
I think there's a fundamental issue with the business model right now in terms of broadcasting as well, because broadcasting is over. I mean, that really is the idea of a broadcast is no longer valid. So in some ways, the BBC may not be able to continue in that form. But I also want to not equate BBC to BBC News to being all of BBC, because the BBC is very broad. And I think the news recently, of course, is that they had a really, really huge hit. Celebrity Traitors, I think, was actually the biggest show in the UK, and a BBC production. So, in certain ways, they still are doing really well in broadcasting. I think in terms of radio, BBC Radio is still very prominent. BBC is a big proponent of comedy. I'm getting a lot of my comedy from BBC Radio 4. And from way over here. But I think there's also this thing about whether or not you can continue in this business and try to be the one in the middle and say that's going to be the one that's going to get me an audience. Because if I'm a broadcaster and I'm not getting an audience, that's also a fundamental failure of the format, right? And can the BBC be centrist? Perhaps not exactly centrist. What it could do is have a balance of programs that are a bit more to the left and a bit more to the right, and try to make that into something that kind of works as a hybrid. But it's also very difficult to do in terms of an audience, because when even for ourselves, when we look for the first source of news, we do lean towards something that makes us feel comfortable, and the BBC does have that brand for some. You talk about it being the source of reliable news. People don't listen to the news because they want to lean left or right. They want to look for that reliable source of news. And I guess left channels as well as right channels, they form that as well. So the right-leaning person listens to Fox because that's a reliable source of the news, and likewise for someone who's inclined to MSNBC. I think if you ask people to self-report, they don't feel that they're in a biased news environment. They just are. It's without knowing they're in that biased situation.
Yeah. I mean, we probably should move on. I mean, it's a big story, but there's a lot of gaslighting going on in the world right now, and I think this is a classic case of gaslighting. And just if you're listening to the conversations that are happening around this, it was initially talked about from the stories that was pulled up in this secret memo that was leaked, which that's always questionable, the concept of the leak, but there's a lot more to this. And if you listen to the people who benefit from the BBC coming down versus the people who do not benefit, there's very different conversations taking place. So I just really want to encourage people to listen to the whole story. There's a lot more to it. We are in an information war. We have been in an information war for a very long time. And we need these sort of neutral, sort of central sort of platforms that don't have too much government interference. Otherwise, there's going to be zero trust left of anyone, because nobody trusts anything they hear from anywhere anymore. So that's the problem. All right, so COP30 is obviously happening at the moment. It's too early to have a discussion about it, but Johan Rockström is there. So he's the principal author behind the 9 Planetary Boundaries, the Stockholm Resilience Centre. Basically, the predictions based on all of the agreements from countries is we're on track for 2.5 degrees Celsius of warming, which is catastrophic. There's a science centre there this year, which sounds good. There's obviously one of the big pieces of news this week was the indigenous community in the Amazon forced themselves into the venue with signs saying our land is not for sale. We can't eat money. We want our lands free from agribusiness, oil exploration, illegal miners, and illegal loggers. So that's getting an interesting response. But the primary response is they should be on the stage, not fighting their way to get in. But there was one piece, and there's a lot. I mean, climate disasters have displaced 250 million people in the past 10 years. But there's one piece called Climate Whiplash, Asia's worst extreme weather events of 2025, which is in Ecobusiness. It starts with from submerged heritage towns to burning forests. 2025 laid bare how climate whiplash is reshaping Asia's weather and way of life. So Hoi An has this famous ancient wooden bridge across the river, and when it was originally built hundreds of years ago, it split the Chinese and the Japanese on either side. So when structures like that have been there for such a long period of time are inundated, that's a sign that, you know, these are not places that usually get hammered by these things. So 15% of cities worldwide are now experiencing whiplash, and that means it can go from drought to flood to heat to cold very, very quickly. So I'll just quickly go through. So I was just mentioning Hoi An in Vietnam. So waste waters swallowed the historic streets of Hoi An, which is a UNESCO heritage listed city, and it's beautiful. Hue, which is just close by, Da Nang, all pummeled. A few months ago, Super Typhoon Ragasa brought storm surges in Hong Kong, and that was another case of rapid intensification. We've seen cloudbursts in Southeast Asia, up in the mountains, in the Himalayas, Pakistan, India, absolutely devastating. We basically wiped away whole villages. Plastic rain in Jakarta. So basically residents are being encouraged to not go outside after rainstorms because they have a chance of ingesting even more microplastics. Wildfire outbreaks in South Korea, and if you come out to this region, this is not a region ready to deal with wildfires. A snowless Kashmir in India, that's in the Himalayas. Longer, harsher winters are expected in Japan. Heat waves have scorched Central and South Asia. So in places like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan, they had temperatures 15 degrees above normal in the summer. In India and places like Rajasthan and Gujarat, they were experiencing temperatures of 46 degrees Celsius, which is just completely deadly. We still don't know how many people are dying. In Indonesia, they've seen so many deadly landslides from Papua New Guinea to Java. Toxic smog in Delhi, India, and this is about the time of year when it's really bad. But after Diwali, there was 488 it's PM 2.5, so the particles in the air, which is 56 times the World Health Organization's safe limit. And it's horrible being in Delhi at this time of the year when that smog's out. So that just sort of gives you an idea. That's this year so far. There's lots more. I encourage everyone to watch the Al Jazeera. Is war one of the biggest threats to the world climate, and what climate change will do to America by mid-century, which is in the Atlantic. Two really interesting pieces.
Wow, that kind of like, you know, it all sums it up a lot in that way. I mean, I had a conversation with someone this week where we talked a lot about people and what wasn't in situations and everything else, and along the conversation, sort of climate and things came up, and it reminded me of the conversation before about so this person did not, you know, believe that climate change is an issue in that way. Is that, you know, climate's always changed and those sort of things. And what I came out of it from thinking about that actually is that, again, is this essence of dialogue in that way, because there was so much more in common about what we felt actually needed to be done. And it kind of says, does it matter where you come from in terms of that, as to what your essential sort of philosophical foundation might have been in some sense in that way. And I think we end up spending more time arguing about whether we are right or not, even when we actually accept that we're all heading in the direction that we don't want to. And worse, when we actually agree on what we need to be doing. And that was fine at the time before, in the 1970s or whatever, to have those differences because they imply different paths. Here, those different paths are not available anymore. Like the comment you said about Johan Rockström in that way. You know, we are heading towards a situation where uncertainty is our future. And how we deal with those uncertainties is our calling in that sense. Yeah. So I think my takeaway...
You don't think we're already there?
Oh, I definitely think we're already there, but I think people don't feel it or don't. You see, the thing about the media and all the rest, whether it's the BBC or Fox News or the Guardian or whatever and so on, is they don't bring out the essence that, you know, Jamaica had 2.5 million visitors in the first half of this year. They're expecting the whole year to have been 5 if that had gone on through. And because of what's happened, for the people who book for next year, now going to have to book somewhere else in terms of their holiday, and the price for those things has just gone up as a result because lots more people rebooking and looking at what they do. So whether you're close to it or otherwise, and if you weren't even thinking of where you're going, but you just want a weekend off for yourself in some ways, you're affected. And it affects you by making your life more expensive. That's it. That's what climate change does. You don't have to actually think about any of the other things. Every one of the things you mentioned implies a higher price for you in one way or another. But nobody really goes on through, but they do talk a lot about what must be done about being able to live with a higher price and having all that inflation and all the rest of it. And at some point, it's going to, you know, I think whether it's realized or not is different. I mean, I was watching a Foyle's War, I think it might have been BBC program.
I think it's ITV.
Was it ITV?
I think Foyle's War, I think, is ITV, yeah.
Okay. So British program about a detective during the time of the Second World War. I've now just lost track of what brought me to that.
Worrying times, David.
Keep it along. But in watching it, what it reminded me of was that we are very much in that time that was portrayed then.
Right.
There's all the uncertainty about what may happen in the future. There's all the things about, oh, Germany won't invade or will invade, or there's all this thing about, you know, the program starts in that period that was known as the phony war, which is when the war was declared, but no fighting as such had really happened yet in that way.
Yeah, it's kind of like that time on steroids, right? Because it's not just war, it's all these other things that are
there's all these other things, right?
Yeah.
And so we're very much like that in that way. And in that time, there was, you know, you still have all the aspects, you still have all the people right in the middle of that. There were all the groups that says, you know, Germany is actually our friend, Hitler is a great guy, we shouldn't be doing this. And those on the other side of all the people who say, you know, this is not our problem. You know, Poland is not our issue. We shouldn't be there. That's not us. And then you have all the other people sort of saying, you know, we must group together and all the rest of it. And we're very much like that, and all that differences a lot.
Yeah, we're not very good at learning from our history. All right, so I'm looking at the time, and I'm going to suggest that we go really fast now. All right. Yep. So, Richard, do you want to jump in on this one? What the hell is going on with US politics? So I've been listening to The Rest Is Politics, Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart. Their comment is the ire towards Starmer is out of proportion compared to sort of leaders historically who've really sort of deserved. He's like 51 points under or something like that. I think Johnson was 15 points under. So it's like out of proportion. But anyway, who wants to go? What the hell's going on over there?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick off.
All right.
I think it's just a reflection of what David just described.
Yeah.
We're dealing with unprecedented uncertainties and people don't like it. And it's being reflected in the polls because you don't know what the hell is going to happen here. And I think, you know, if you're looking at you have an unprecedented parliamentary situation where you effectively have complete control of the agenda with that kind of majority, and he has been totally ineffective. I mean, it's incredibly poor leadership.
Yeah, is it a lack of charisma? Because his team seem loyal to him.
Yeah,
but he seems like the Biden thing. He didn't talk about what he was doing. He didn't, they didn't tell the story. Is it that as well?
He might not be flamboyant, but I don't think that's a hindrance. I think the guy essentially don't understand politics and how it's supposed to work, and that's a real problem.
Right.
I don't know if that's true. I mean, I think it's much more basic. The country has a lot of expectations and a lot of wishes and a lot of needs, and it has no money. So and that's it. All the problem is because the Treasury is juggling between rules that it sets for itself and not want to break, recognition that if it did go along and break them, what they will find is that the confidence in kind of Britain Inc. will collapse if it were to do that. And the fact that its own party members have all been elated at the fact that they're elected with such majority to think that the economic doesn't matter. So it's
the heritage it's the heritage of Brexit, right?
Yeah, it's not just the heritage of Brexit.
No,
it's because this is the French government is in no better state.
Yeah, right.
It's constantly lost itself in that way. The German government is in no better state. The Japan government, the reason why Takaichi is elected in that way is for the same reason. And don't forget, South Korea, the government actually called on a military coup on itself last year in order to try and force through a budget. And the US government have just gone through the most horrendous kind of budget shutdown with no resolution, because this short-term budget connects until January, with supposedly a vote on the health insurance in December, which won't come. But what you're going to find is, what you see in all of these things is that our expectations and the crisis, our response to crisis is to call on governments to do something.
Yeah.
And that increases what we expect them to do. Just look at COP. That every COP increases the bill that's supposed to be paid in order to do it. Every time a discussion comes along, someone says, well, you got to consider that too. Oh, let's set a budget for that. And the governments have all their money tied up, and they all operate as businesses in the sense of promoting the business of their countries. It's like, UK Inc. is what it is, right? Japan Inc. and all those things. And if they veer from what they can actually face or do in that sense, then the Inc., the corporation aspect of thinking about it, collapses, because our economy cannot support itself anymore.
Yeah, as it now stands, right?
As it now stands. Yeah. But it's not going to change until it collapses. Very few company actually gets out of a situation until it has collapsed, and then you get someone come in and tidy it up and do what's necessary.
Yeah, but the suffering. But I think that's the point that we sort of keep trying to make. Like, this is a time when we have to expect a lot of pain.
I have a new word,
but we don't have the leaders who are capable of leading through that pain, or they're not. I just want a government to stand up and be honest about the time we are in and what it means, because there's a video circulating at the moment that's saying basically climate crisis is one of the biggest risks of the climate crisis is the rise of fascism, which
of course,
which I've been talking about for years, right? Of course, and that's the path that we're very much on in many, many ways, which is why we need to protect our information systems. That's a path we're on in many, many ways in many, many countries. But that is not the best outcome for all of us. And it's not even a great outcome for the people who are fighting for it. But that is the path that we are on. And, when you hear reform is potentially being elected in the UK, you just like that's Like that's even worse than Trump.
Well,
No, but
I think this is where you need to kind of think back to yourself, back to Natalie's kind of message of the girl, the red silk dress, in that way, about that identity and that journey and actually that discovery through yourself in that way. And I think we worry too much about all the other things around us, and in doing so, we're making ourselves victims before we even start. And in that case, we are actually failing our own selves. I found a word today, this week, eudaimonic, EUDAIMONIC. I never knew it before. I was looking for a word, and I asked Gemini Pro. And asked Gemini Pro, I want an adjective that describes a complete life in the sense that it is fulfilling. I'm reading it out at the moment where I asked. Spiritually and economically. It does not have to have plenty or imply there is no hardship, but rather the contrary, that scarcity and hardship do not have their conventional meaning because they're integral to the wholeness of life. And I wasn't sure what it would come up with. I thought, I've never come across a word that recaptures that. And it came up and it says eudaimonic. This term comes from the Greek word eudaimonia, which is central concept in Aristotelian ethics. Back to Aristotle. It is often translated as flourishing, living well, or human flourishing. Here's why it fits your description. Beyond happiness, eudaimonia is not about feeling happy or pleased in the moment. It describes a state of being that's achieved by living a life of virtue, purpose, and excellence. Integrates all aspects of life. It inherently includes spiritual and moral fulfillment. While it doesn't ignore material circumstances, it places them in a proper subordinate role. A eudaimonic life is one where economic activity serves the higher purpose of living virtuously rather than being end in itself. Embraces hardship. Crucially, the pursuit of a eudaimonic life is inseparable from overcoming challenges. Virtue is developed and expressed by making the right choices in difficult situations. Therefore, hardship and struggle are not seen as detracting from life's values, but are integral to the process of flourishing. They are the very ground upon which the meaning of life is built. So that was a great word. And that is our opportunity at this point, because there are so many uncertainties, there are so many of these things around. Now is that time for the individual. But this is in the recognition that in the fulfillment of ourselves, we are connected with everything else. We're connected with everyone else.
Yeah.
Polycrisis connects us all. The fact that if I just want to go for a spa treat on a weekend in the UK, the price for that's gone up because someone had been planning to go to Jamaica and now has rebooked.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Joe, did you have any thoughts before? I was just going to say US shenanigans, all the stuff going on there. Obviously, Epstein, is this enough? Will it bring him down? It could be today, it could be tomorrow, it could be 6 years from now, right? With that, you just never, it doesn't seem to be, it doesn't make any logical sense.
Yeah, I think what's happening in the UK actually is about the story of contrast, right? I think what Starmer was supposed to represent was the contrast to what was supposed to be wrong with everything, and in terms of what it creates is this great sense of anticipation for a much more dynamic change, and Starmer is not a dynamic answer to things. He doesn't embody dynamism, right? He's
no Caesar.
He's just not that, right? So he's the. It's like you have a series of really bad toys in a shop, and you go like, okay, I'll take the camel, and then you go, well, turns out it's a camel, right? So I think that's really the problem.
It's a camel. It's a bit brutal. I thought I was harsh. But
I think it's something about personalities, and I think that's sometimes the way things work. Sometimes we're in a world where we do need a bit of flourish, and I guess he's not that. But I think back to thinking about the Epstein files and all that stuff. I mean, there's going to be all the news that's going around about what's happening with the news that's released, and people are going to confuse that with what's from the Epstein files. These news stories about the emails and stuff actually aren't coming from the files. They're actually from another source, another new source that are not
It's
in the
the
file.
Epstein estate.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
it's a different source altogether. Will it bring down Trump? I think there's something in there about how if someone spends a lot of time trying to hide something, and the audience begins to get a sense of it, it's hard to get rid of the smell of it. And I think that's something in there, and it's evidently there's something that does bring him shame. Maybe this is the thing that he had. I mean, very few things shame him, obviously, but I think it's something that he's been trying quite hard to step aside from or circumvent. So it may not necessarily be enough there, but at the same time, I think there's enough in his base that is going to be rattled by this, right? If they can make the case, and I think the news about what's happening behind the scenes, the whistleblower talking about what's happening for I can't remember her name right now, but the Epstein's
Maxwell.
Yeah, so the kind of behavior and the kind of privileges that are being extended to her, which behind the scenes in prison, it just seems like something is going on there, and certain things get by. As I think what happens is the base is being tested all the time with, okay, well, he's done this as well. What do you feel about that? Okay, well, he won't break down the east anything. He won't break down anything at the White House. Oh, the East Wing is gone. What do you think about that? Oh, it's okay. It's kind of within the realm of expectations. You get to the part where you go like, he's possibly a pedophile. Well, okay, we'll see how it goes. I mean, I
think that's not a camel you picked up. It's a gremlin, and you fed it after midnight.
Yeah.
But one of the things with the whole Epstein thing is, so Lauren Boebert, whatever her name is, was taken into a secure room and tried to convince to change her story, right? And she's not a lady that impresses me in any, she's the lady that gave the hand job to the boyfriend after leaving the husband, and she's a Christian, So, but also Marjorie Taylor Greene and a few other women on the right were in a closed-door meeting with Epstein survivors, and they heard firsthand the stories, and all of them came out different women, every single one of them. And everyone's talking about MTG, she's standing up to Trump and doing all this sort of stuff. She was in the room with Epstein survivors, and there was a Republican saying, if you don't vote for the release of this information and you're on the Republican Party, then maybe not now, but in a few years' time, that you will be remembered as protecting pedophiles, right? So we're moving into a different energy, I think, whether or not he's the survivor of the survivors, this dude, Trump. But then J.D. Vance is not doing so well. You were talking about chameleons earlier.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that there will be a chameleon as president is something that I find so fascinating. I think he's the ultimate of chameleons. He has shaped himself for everything that he's ever done. He's changed his name. He's changed his religion. Now he's got an issue because his wife's Hindu and she won't change her religion. So now apparently their marriage is on the rocks. Like, there's so much about him that is wrong. If he steps up after Trump, we don't know. I would never have a chameleon president.
Well, Trump is the ultimate Teflon man, right? Because nothing sticks to him. However, Teflon is not, at the end of the day, a very resistant material, so it's very pierceable. I fundamentally believe the only people who can bring him down is senior Republicans in Congress. I don't think media can do it on their own. I don't think you have enough legislative powers at this point because he stacked kind of the courts in his favor. There is a small likelihood that the Supreme Court will actually kind of start wearing the other way if they can, really smell where it's heading. That's a possibility. Yeah. However, if you're a Republican now it's looking pretty bleak. Personally, I always felt that, they would ultimately curse the day when they decided not to impeach him, because he would come back to haunt them. And if his goal is ultimately a third term or whatever, and manage to push, for whatever reason, next year's midterms into the long grass so they don't happen, they might stick with him. But there must be a lot of Republicans that are incredibly fearful of their whole personal future here. Because you're walking into a headwind, right? Going from here to next year's election, it's going to be very, very tough for a lot of these people to survive. And if they really change the attack, and, at the end of the day, the Epstein's file, and all the things around him are, obviously very unpleasant stuff. But it might be the straw that breaks the camel's back, because if you couldn't get rid of him over the riots, it's like, is this really the thing that should push out the president, given that he...
Yeah, exactly. I know, right? But it's kind of like an Al Capone. We had 2 terrorist attacks, one in Delhi and one in Lahore, so India and Pakistan. India has been quite conservative in its accusations, which is a bit of a relief. Pakistan's blamed India, but India hasn't blamed Pakistan directly, because basically they said if there's a terrorist attack, it's war. So they've kind of sort of limited in what they can say. But the other story that broke this week that I think is really interesting is data center investment in India. So Joe's going to talk about some data center stuff in a minute, but of course there's a massive investment going into India to invest in data centers, and that's happening all over the world. But 2 of the areas that they're looking at clusters in Mumbai, Hyderabad, Chennai, and Bengaluru, right? I've talked about Bangalore before. I watched the tech industry come in and basically destroy the environment. They didn't technically do it. The Indian government did it, but they destroyed the environment. They destroyed small scale farmers and built this mega city for technology. Chennai has suffered some of the worst droughts India's seen, and Hyderabad and Mumbai, I'm not really sure of their water situation, because they get a lot of monsoonal water coming through that sort of part of India. But this is one of my great fears about data centers. When they start building them in countries like India or other countries with even less, the governments will take the money. They'll take it because they need to take it, because they've got to help, because nobody's got any money, right? So they're going to take the money, but India's majority of its energy is still run by coal. So these data centers are going to be run by coal, and they're going to take any of the remaining water that's left. And I think it's just a tragedy. Thailand has experienced 1,300 square kilometers in the center of the country that has been absolutely hammered by floods. And during the pandemic, we actually went to one of these areas, and it was under severe drought. So the area that's been under severe drought is now under severe flooding. And Bangkok also saw floods yesterday morning. So they basically tried to protect Bangkok by allowing this region to flood, but the protection didn't work. Joe, a couple of AI stories that I shared with you, but there might be something else you want to talk about. Give us an AI update.
Well, I was going through them. Am I on? Yeah.
There you go.
I was going to just go through the material that you had sent me, just talking about the cost that people don't usually think about. Usually we think about the cost of AI. Now we think about the energy and the resources used to actually produce the output. But there is a side of it that is largely not considered. It depends on on where you are. But if you're fully considering the cost of AI, then you also have the cost. You also have to think about the cost of creating the resource, right? So there's the energy you use for actually running all the programs, and I was actually looking at some of the information there as well. It's pretty staggering in terms of what the goals are. One of the big numbers I think you'll hear about is Sam Altman talking about ultimately what he's trying to do is create a power source that I won't use. I can't remember. I think 750, 250 gigawatts or something like that.
Find it.
And in terms of how big that is actually basically all the energy that's being used, all the electricity that's being used by India, right? So this is that.
Yeah.
We're looking at power sources.
So I'll tell you, OpenAI's audacious long-term goal is to build 250 gigawatts of capacity by 2033. If they achieve this goal, it's almost exactly as much electricity as India's 1.5 billion people, and is likely to emit nearly twice as much carbon dioxide as ExxonMobil, the world's largest non-state carbon emitter.
Yeah. So this is the cost of actually using the resources, and we're looking at that. But what isn't being considered as well right now is actually the cost of producing the stuff that goes into AI. So the cost of producing the chips, the things like what's happening in Taiwan. There's one particular fabrication plant where they just looked at this plant and said, how much is it costing them to create that? So they use 1 gigawatt of power to create the chips that they do. There's an increasing size of chips as well. So with NVIDIA's chip now, it's about 7 times the size of the average Apple chip. What is significant about this as well? It's not just the way chips are designed now. It's about simultaneous computing, right? So it's not just about one thing being put through the whole thing. Many different things are being put in at the same time, and that's the whole idea of the GPU. That creates a lot of, first of all, a lot more heat as well. So the bigger hardware leads to more heat production. So that's that part of it. But if we step one step further back, we're talking about the process of creating those chips, the process of cooling those plants, the kind of water that's being consumed as well. I mean, I was quite surprised to find out that in Taiwan they had 3 years where the farmers weren't able to plant. They weren't able to get enough water because the water was being used for chips, for chip production, for semiconductors. And that's quite
Crazy,
stark.
right?
It's quite stark when you think about it from a safety perspective. But it was just the sheer amount of it, the sheer amount of power that's being used, the actual cost in terms of just the resources around it, and the chemicals that are being released as well. So they talked about PFAS, which you hear so much about, and there's even talk about the greenhouse gases, right? So we hear so much about carbon dioxide and how terrible it is. There's a gas they use. I can't remember the name of it, but basically
sulfur hexafluoride, which escapes the factories and settles in the atmosphere and has a heating effect 23,500 times that of CO2.
Yeah.
And it lasts forever. So it's not only just that. I mean, it actually lasts. Methane is considered a big thing, but it decays over
10 years, right?
Over 10 years. It breaks down into CO2. This stuff stays. But the point of all this that I think is really worth pointing out is that because it does all these things and needs all this energy and everything, you need a lot of money for it. So what happens is that in each round of valuation, you have to get the money in to pay for that. And that actually elevates the price of all these companies and all the rest of it, because you're putting money in there. And so it raises the price. And so more people just follow that price. So what happens as a result of all of these things is it makes these companies from an investment perspective more attractive, because you need more money to produce it, and therefore it is going to produce more money. That now you can say obviously it's not going to work, but that's not the investment trend. That's not the investment thinking. There it just follows the price, follows what happens to that goes on there. And you get rounds and rounds of that until someone goes along and says, is this an emperor with no new clothes? And actually, or no clothes at all. And at that point, something happens. But we are far from that point. We are far from that point. It's coming along in slow ways.
I'm not sure we're far away from that point.
I wanted to ask Joe
there yet, but there are definitely some cracks opening up, right? and the thinking around this, because people just extrapolate the absolute power demand, the absolute water demand, and say it's not going to work. And you are now on a lot of metrics, you are basically attaching a rosier future than we did 25 years ago during the first tech bubble. And it didn't end very well. So I don't think you're there yet, because there is still more juice to squeeze out of the sort of carton, but I don't think we're far away. I think it's increasingly catching up with us.
I want to ask Joe. So, they're looking at the carbon capture, right? So to create enough carbon capture technology to draw down the CO2 from the atmosphere, it needs to rapidly become the second largest industry in the world. But from what I'm seeing around the data centers for AI, it looks like they could be equally that big, right? I've shared the article here. This is the first article. So we've talked about energy, we've talked about water use, but this talks about PFAS, which is forever chemicals. And by the way, Teflon is a forever chemical, Richard. So
yeah.
So Donald Trump is forever chemical. But what I found really interesting was the factories. So it's obviously the mining, all the precious metals that they need to mine to make the chips. It's the what's released from the factories in the air and in the water. So the water that's released that cools the factories is waste, because it's full of these contaminants, and there's numerous cases of people who work in these facilities with leukemia, brain tumors, and pancreatic cancer just among the workers. So it wherever it is, it pollutes. So everyone's getting data centers on their doorstep. There's stuff coming out of them. We've got this other, gas that we were talking about, sulfur hexafluoride. So just from an environmental perspective, from an energy use perspective, we know that India is going to be pumping the coal to get enough energy to pump these data centers. Other countries are going to do the same. It's what the hell are we doing? So I just wanted to ask Joe, like, you're an AI champion. When you read this, what did you think?
It makes it harder to have this conversation. I mean, but it's, we're talking about one aspect of it right now, which looks really terrible. Like if you they always say you don't want to know how sausage is made, right? When it comes to technology and any kind of manufacturing, even solar panels, anything that is even, like we talk about green energy and all the solutions that we're looking for and say, oh, these are all the great things that will save us. The manufacturing process for all those are also terrible. I mean, they may not have the kind of scale and demand that maybe is the same for semiconductors for AI, but they're certainly there as well, right? So this whole discussion about rare earths, I mean, we're talking about it in terms of AI chips and stuff like that. But this is also going to be very, very significant for the development of another technology, which is going to move us forward, which is batteries, right? If we're going to use green energy, we need batteries, and we need that kind of stuff. So that's, in some senses, it's kind of the thing that you go like, well, we got if we're gonna try to get out of it, we need to do something, and maybe we can build it could build the thing that's going to get us out of it. And I think this is the big argument that you have with Bill Gates's note from a few weeks ago, right? The progress that's being made, the increase in the level of compute and power and stuff, is going to lead us to a place where we're going to have many diseases defeated, right? There's actually going to be a case where we can start having longevity, where there's going to be a thing where the 80-year-old is now not looking at the end of his life, but he's actually in the midway. He's now maybe midway or more, or even less, something like that. If we solve the aging problem, then we're no longer looking at someone's lifespan being 80 to 90 years. Someone can then and maybe has to plan their life around the possibility that might be 300 years old, right? That changes.
So do you get I was just going to say, do you get the irony of that? So one of the first news stories I shared was Antarctica. They think it's begun collapsing,
Yep.
Living beyond 80 years, Antarctica's collapsing, extreme heat, plastic rain. AI might solve the problem, but in the meantime, like you're absolutely right. Like all manufacturing processes are not good for the environment, but AI is the only technology of the ones that you talked about where the people who founded it are sounding the alarm that it's gonna destroy civilization. Just before the show, I sent you an article which talks about a cyber attack that was generated by AI.
What
Not
I
by
was getting
humans,
at,
by AI.
yeah, what I was getting at ultimately was that with the progress of technology,
in that immortality. Sorry, I just want to add a bit about that immortality.
Should Joe just finish what he was saying, David?
Yeah, I was just going to say that might create the motivation for change, because the problem is when people feel that there's nothing, they don't have to be around for the problems they cause, or this life isn't relevant to them anymore. Then you can make those choices that are irresponsible. But if your life truly becomes if the math or the calculus around living and your life that you lead is completely different, where now your reputation sticks with you for the next 200 years, where death is only by accident, it changes the math. It changes what ageism is about, and of course, ultimately, if done correctly, if done well, we are not talking about being old and feeling old. We're literally going to be much better off where our cells are regenerating and we're getting possibly younger as we spend more time on Earth.
Sounds like a nightmare.
Exactly to that. I mean, I was watching this episode of Doctor Who. Okay, and it talked about a girl, Ashilda, who was a Viking young girl, and she died, and the doctors managed to save her with this alien technology and gave her immortality, so she could live and be healthy and young and all of those things all the time. And Doctor Who is about time traveling and things, and he meets her back, several hundred years later. And she had lived so long, she had forgotten more than she had actually remember, and she had lost her whole sense of immortality. Her whole sense of humanity, because you just see things pass and you don't care anymore because you see so many things pass. You see all the animals pass and die. You see all the lands and oceans give away. And at some point, they are no longer relevant. And in Borges' novel, Labyrinth, here's a story at the end about people who have become immortal. And they sit around, they don't do anything because there's no need to do anything anymore, because you're still going to be around whatever you do. And you completely lose your sense of purpose and humanity. That's the danger. That's the real gift or curse of immortality. We think immortality is great because we are mortal. But if you're granted immortality, that's your curse. You can never die. You will see all things pass, all of creation pass. And still you are that person who has to live through it all. And so what will happen is you lose all meaning, you lose all emotions, you lose all sense of love of anything, because you can no longer cope with it.
Right, guys, we're going to wrap up. I couldn't think of anything worse than living to 200, but anyway, if I get to 70, I'll be happy with that. Right, what's keeping you distracted? Who wants to go first?
My book came out. I don't know if I can share a screen on it. Is that possible? Can I try?
Yeah, of course.
Absolutely.
Who wants to keep talking while he's...
I'm preoccupied by traveling. I thought I'd sorted all the Christmas arrangements out, but they've now been thrown up in the air because of family emergencies. But I'm trying to sort it all out.
Right. Okay. And it's nice and cold by the looks of David anyway. All right. David's books is out, Thriving in Nature's Pace.
So it's there. That's Amazon UK. So you can order it.
Cool.
And it's actually out sooner in Asia. So if you're in Asia, it's apparently coming out today, 14th, in that way. It's for young people who feel worried about their future. And it's for young professionals who want to do better. And it's for basically their businesses who wants to thrive at nature's pace. And the whole idea of thriving at nature's pace is everything we're talking about, basically.
Yeah. And for everyone who's
that
always
word.
asking for solutions, right? This is a solution.
Yeah.
So so have a look. All right, Joe.
Oh.
I'm glad it's on Amazon. It's easier for me to get, by the way.
Yeah,
Even though I hate buying from Amazon. Sorry.
Buy from the World Scientific Press directly.
Yeah, it's just more complicated, you know. That's the problem, right?
They're in Singapore.
Okay. There you go.
Yeah. So this is the link. I mean, I chose World Scientific Press because they're in Singapore. They're in Asia.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Good to know. All right.
So that's the
got it.
That's the link.
All right.
And there's a promo code for 20% off if you buy from World Scientific Press directly.
Yep.
There you go.
That's cool.
Brilliant. All right, Joe.
I watched a movie last night, which I think many married couples will enjoy, and at the same time have moments of personal cringe while they're holding hands with their partners. The Roses. I'm not sure if you've seen this remake of the old War of the Roses.
I've heard about it.
Okay, well, it stars Olivia Colman and Benedict Cumberbatch as the main characters. But I think you'll enjoy the chemistry that they have. It's not quite the usual Hollywood chemistry where it's two naturally very attractive people. But this is a kind of couple you would have met somewhere in the UK, except that they're in the US. And I think that combination of their personal gravitas as characters kind of works really well. So it's a bit like seeing I want to say Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor in a kind of a modern take, except that maybe Olivia's not quite as glamorous as Elizabeth, but it's a fun romp, and actually lots of clever dialogue, and yeah, there's always that very. We were watching it as a couple, quite pensive that we might be triggered by moments, and I think secretly we were, but we didn't let on.
All right. I watched the first one when my parents were going through their divorce and going through their court case, and I actually had to walk out. It just was one of those movies that was the wrong time. So I'm hesitant.
This one's a bit kinder.
Okay.
It's not as literal, not as slapstick, but it's still got some moments in it. But I think you'll enjoy it.
What's it called again?
The Roses.
The Roses.
Yeah, just those two, right? We've been watching The Diplomat, the new series of The Diplomat. Have you guys watched any of that yet? Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
It's very cool. It's very cool. So we've just got 2 more shows, and we're finished this new season. Finished Slow Horses for the season. It's like bum. I hate it when that finishes. Oh, it's so good. It's so good. But yeah, The Diplomat's great. The main actress, Kerry, whatever her name is, she's a really good actor, I suppose. But anyway, yeah. So there's the show. Lots going on. As you can see, we don't agree with each other on everything, and that's kind of the point. That's the whole point. We shouldn't agree with each other on everything. But that's the complex world we live in. We, as we always say, look around the story. There's lots of different angles, and try not to get sucked in the the rabbit holes. Challenging times.
Very.
I think we managed a good show today. We managed to typify or portray 2 world leaders as both as a forever chemical and a camel.
Well, a camel stores water, so yeah, I mean that's a good thing. Yeah, it's like when you said Teflon Don. It's like you do realize that's a forever chemical. That's where my mind went straight away. That's stupid. Yeah, the world we live in. All right, guys, we'll see you next week. All right. Yeah.
Goodbye.
Take care,
everybody.
Have a good weekend.
There you go.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Go grab David's book.
Yep.
All right.
Promoting it.
Yeah, no worries. Bye.
Bye.